I'm going to serve as your narrator this morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to Gold Dredge 8. We're going to start off with a presentation about this big metal tube in front of me. As you can imagine, this is the one and only Trans-Alaska Pipeline. It is 800 miles long, one of the biggest pipeline systems in the world. It spans from the northernmost coast of Alaska on the shores of Prudhoe Bay, the Beaufort Sea, and the Arctic Ocean. It goes 800 miles south and terminates at the Valdez Marine Terminal, Valdez, Alaska, on the shores of Prince William Sound in the Gulf of Alaska. It was built from 1973 to 1977 and has a diameter of 48 inches. What you see here is not the actual pipeline. It's inside there. It's 4 feet in diameter. The average thickness of that steel is about half of an inch. They've got dense insulation wrapped around the outside of that pipeline. What you see here is the outermost stainless steel sheeting encasement to protect it from the weather. Now, about half of this pipeline was constructed above ground. About half of it was placed below. They preferred to bury it. It tended to be safer that way. As an example of it being below ground, if you turn your attention north, that big hill over there in the distance, and note that swath of ground that's clear cut away up that hill? That's the right-of-way easement of the pipeline. It's buried right up that hillside over there. It also goes right back underground right over here at the end of that fencing. Now, instances like this, when it is above ground, like you see in front of you, it's an indication that it's on unstable ground, that it's on what's called permafrost. And you're going to hear quite a bit more about permafrost later on. But understand that permafrost is pervasive in Alaska, particularly interior and the further north that you go. Permafrost means that it is ground that is frozen solid and it stays that way year-round. It never thaws out when left undisturbed. It froze eons ago during our ice age, and even today, if you were to dig down 8, 10, 12 feet or so, that material is frozen solid. It stays that way year-round, never thaws out when left undisturbed. You may notice the condition of our roads, particularly our more rural roads. Over time, when that permafrost is disturbed and allowed to thaw out, it turns kind of mucky, and in the wintertime it refreezes. And over the years, as it repeats that process of thawing out and refreezing, thawing out and refreezing, it begins to expand and contract and heave and buckle. And as a result, we get a lot of those heaves and buckles manifesting in our roads, lots of cracks, fissures, potholes, and so forth. Similarly, you have to be careful where you build your home in Alaska. If you build your home on top of permafrost, over time, the heat signature from the footprint of your home is going to begin to disturb that permafrost. It's going to start to heave and buckle your foundation, cracking your foundation, messing up door jambs, cracking windows, and so forth. For similar purposes, they've got the pipeline suspended above that permafrost. You note these H-shaped structures that the pipeline's resting on? Those are called VSMs. That stands for Vertical Support Members. There are 78,000 of these VSMs along the length of the pipeline, based on average at about 60 feet intervals. Now note the vertical components of these VSMs, the cylinders that go vertically down the ground. And I'll turn everyone's attention to the ones that are upstream here a little bit, with those funny-looking fins on top of those cylinders. Now, those cylinders are sealed. They go down in the ground anywhere from 15 feet, even down to 70 feet down in that permafrost. Now, I'm not much of a chemist or a physicist, but it's my understanding they've got a compound sealed inside those cylinders known as anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous ammonia is a compound that happens to vaporize at temperatures just below freezing, right about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Such that as that ammonia compound goes down those cylinders, exposing itself to that cold permafrost, if or when the day comes that it warms up just enough to vaporize, just below freezing, turns into a gas and rises as heat rises. Those fins help serve as heat exchangers. They help cool that ammonia compound back down, recondensing it into liquid state so it can stay settled down at the bottom of that cylinder, keeping that ground good and cold, passively refrigerating that permafrost so it can be kept intact and the integrity of the pipeline can be maintained. Now note too that the pipeline itself is not actually bolted down to these VSMs. It's allowed to slide back and forth and bump up and down and so forth. Likewise, they don't always run the pipeline in a straight line. Occasionally you'll see how they'll zigzag it. That's to address all the seismic activity we have in our state. We get a lot of earthquakes in Alaska. This pipeline is built to withstand an 8.5 magnitude earthquake. That's a massive earthquake. The biggest one to have occurred on record since the pipeline was built was back in 2002. That was along the Denali Fault, about 220 miles south of it. That was a 7.9 magnitude earthquake. This pipeline wiggled and jiggled and bounced around as it's designed to do, but it did not sustain any damage in and of itself. Now, instances where the pipeline is buried includes, for example, for water crossings, river crossings, and animal crossings. The oil, of course, is buoyant. It likes to float on top of water. That's where these concrete structures come into play that I'm standing on here. These are called river weights or saddles. They literally saddle these down on top of the pipeline to anchor it down good, keep it good and stable when they bury it underneath those riverways and in no flood started to go underneath there much more regularly these days. Now at its peak, this pipeline produced about 2.1 million barrels of oil per day. Currently we're down to about 600,000 barrels per day. And the nature of that decline is a source of a fair amount of controversy for us in our state here because we're pretty well dependent on the revenue derived from that oil here. But suffice it to say that the light, sweet, crude grade of oil that has flown through here for the past 36 years, the easy stuff they've been able to recover so far, it is indeed dwindling. Now, it's indisputably a finite resource, but they know, it's confirmed, there's still vast amounts of oil